Have you ever performed a simple act of kindness, never expecting it to change your life? For Leo Vance, a struggling father, drowning in debt, pulling a little girl from the path of a speeding car, was just the right thing to do. He had no idea the child with her frightened eyes and broken leg was the only daughter of Seraphina Sterling, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Aethelred Media Group. He thought his dreams of being an animator were dead and buried. He was wrong. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about how one moment of courage can rewrite a future, proving that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. The Chicago wind in late October had a particular cruelty to it. It didn't just chill the bones. It seemed to carry the scent of missed opportunities and overdue bills. For Leo Vance, that scent was as familiar as the worn-out fabric of his courier jacket. He guided his rust-pocked sedan through the afternoon traffic, a stack of catering boxes perfuming the air with the smell of food he and his 8-year-old son, Owen, could rarely afford. His phone buzzed in its cradle, a reminder from his landlord, Mr. Henderson, flashing on the screen. Leo need to talk about this month, getting behind. He swiped it away with a sigh that fogged the inside of the windshield. Getting behind wasn't a state of being. It was his permanent address. 5 years ago, Leo Vance had been on the cusp of everything. Vance Visions. His fledgling animation studio had poured every cent he had and every ounce of his soul into its first feature, The Star Eater's Son. It was his masterpiece, a poignant tale of a boy who befriends a fallen constellation. But a soured partnership and a sudden market downturn had shattered it all. The studio folded, his partner vanished with the last of the capital, and Leo was left with a mountain of debt and the shattered shards of his ambition. Now his artistic hands, once deft with a stylus and a sketch pad, were calloused from hauling boxes. He glanced at the passenger seat, where a well-loved sketchbook lay open. A drawing of Owen reimagined as a knight with a mischievous grin stared back. Owen was the reason he did this, the reason he swallowed his pride with every low-paying delivery. His son was a brilliant, vibrant star in his otherwise grey universe, and for him, Leo would brave 1,000 Chicago winters. He was making a turn onto a quieter, tree-lined street near Lincoln Park, the kind of street where old money resided in stately brownstones when his world tilted on its axis. A flash of pink, a bouncing red ball, a child. A little girl no older than Owen had darted from between two parked cars, chasing the errant ball as it skipped into the street. Her laughter, a bright tinkling sound, was instantly swallowed by the guttural roar of a black SUV speeding around the corner, its driver oblivious. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing all at once. Leo's mind didn't process a decision. His body simply reacted. The instincts of a father, primal and absolute, took over. He slammed on the brakes, his own car fishtailing, with a screech of tortured rubber. He threw open his door before the vehicle had even stopped moving, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Hey, stop!" He screamed, his voice raw. But it was lost in the wind and the engine's growl. The SUV driver finally saw her. But it was too late to brake effectively. Leo didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, a desperate, lunging sprint of 6 paces. He scooped the girl into his arms, the scent of lavender shampoo filling his senses, and twisted his body, using his own back to absorb the impact as he crashed onto the unforgiving asphalt. He felt a searing white-hot pain shoot through his side as he collided with the curb, his arm wrapping protectively around the child's head. The SUV swerved violently, its tires shrieking as it mounted the opposite curb and crashed into a wrought-iron fence with a sickening crunch of metal. For a moment there was only a ringing silence punctuated by his own ragged breaths. The girl in his arms let out a terrified, pain-filled sob. "It's okay," he gasped, his ribs screaming in protest. "You're okay. I've got you." He pushed himself up, ignoring the dizzying pain. The girl, her face pale and streaked with tears, was clutching her leg. It was bent at an unnatural angle just below the knee, a compound fracture. Nausea rolled through him, but he forced it down. "Don't look, sweetie. Just look at me," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. He shrugged off his courier jacket and gently wrapped it around her, trying to shield her from the shock and the cold. "What's your name, Ma?" "Rosie," she whimpered, her small body trembling. "Okay, Rosie. My name is Leo. We're going to get you some help." Doors were opening along the street. People were shouting their voices, a confusing cacophony. The driver of the SUV, a pale, shaken man in a chauffeur's uniform, stumbled out of his vehicle, clutching his head. Leo's gaze fell on the red ball, now deflated, and still lying in the middle of the street. Such a simple, innocent thing, the catalyst for so much chaos. He held Rosie a little tighter, the weight of her small, injured body, a terrifying and profound reality in his arms. The catering order was forgotten. The landlord's text was forgotten. In that moment, cradling a stranger's child on a cold Chicago sidewalk, the only thing that mattered was the frightened, trusting brown eyes looking up at him. He had saved her, but as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, he had no way of knowing that this single, impulsive act of humanity was about to unravel the tightly wound misery of his life. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a world of controlled chaos. The air hummed with beeps, hushed conversations, and the sterile scent of antiseptic that always seemed to cling to places of healing and pain. Leo sat in a stiff plastic chair, a dull, persistent ache radiating from his ribs where he'd hit the curb. A nurse had examined him, declared him severely bruised but miraculously unbroken, and offered him painkillers he'd politely refused. He needed a clear head. He hadn't left. He couldn't. After the paramedics had carefully stabilized Rosie's leg and whisked her away, he'd given his statement to a flustered police officer, then driven his dented sedan to the hospital. He'd told the receptionist he was the one who had brought the girl in, a friend of the family, a small lie to ensure they'd let him stay until he knew she was all right. He felt a strange, fierce protectiveness for the little girl he'd known for all of 10 minutes. He'd called Owen's after-school program, his voice tight as he explained he'd be late. "Is everything okay?" Dad Owen's voice, small and worried over the phone, had twisted his heart. "Everything's fine, champ. Just helping someone out. I'll be there as soon as I can." An hour crept by, each minute feeling like a lifetime. Finally, a woman with a severe black haircut and an expensive-looking pantsuit approached him. She moved with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency, her eyes scanning him as if he were an item on a balance sheet. "Mr. Vance?" she asked, her tone clipped and professional. "Yes." "Is Rosie okay? Is her family here?" "Rosalind is stable. The doctors are setting the fracture now. She'll be in a cast for several weeks, but they expect a full recovery." The woman stated her face, betraying no emotion. "I am Genevieve Thorne, Mrs. Sterling's executive assistant. Mrs. Sterling has just arrived and is with her daughter. Mrs. Sterling, that's her mum. I'm so glad she's here. Please tell her Rosie was incredibly brave." Genevieve gave a curt nod. "Mrs. Sterling is exceptionally grateful for your intervention. She understands you acted at great personal risk. She has instructed me to handle all of the particulars." She opened a sleek leather portfolio and produced a checkbook. She would like to compensate you for your time, any damages to your vehicle, and as a token of her immense gratitude. If you'll just tell me an appropriate figure. Leo stared at the checkbook, a knot of discomfort tightening in his bruised chest. He saw the calculation in the assistant's eyes, the clean, transactional nature of the offer. This was how people of means solved problems. They wrote a check and the unpleasantness disappeared. No. He said the word coming out softer than he intended. He cleared his throat. No, thank you. That's not necessary. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. I'm sorry, I don't want any money, Leo clarified, meeting her gaze directly. I'm a father. I did what anyone would have done. My car has a new dent, but I have insurance for that. I'm just glad the little girl is going to be okay. That's all. A flicker of something surprised suspicion crossed Genevieve's face before being replaced by her professional mask. That is very admirable, Mr. Vance. But Mrs. Sterling insists, and I insist that she doesn't, Leo said, a touch of firmness entering his voice. He stood up, wincing as his ribs protested. Look, all I want is to know for sure that she's okay. If you could just let her mother know I'm glad I was there, that's more than enough. I need to go pick up my son. He turned to leave, feeling the assistant's bewildered gaze on his back. His pride, the one thing his financial ruin hadn't managed to completely erode, felt strangely intact. He hadn't saved that little girl for a reward. As he reached the sliding glass doors of the emergency exit, a quiet voice called out his name. Mr. Vance. He turned. A woman stood there, her presence instantly commanding the space around her. She was tall and elegant, with dark hair pulled back in a simple but sophisticated chignon. Her face was pale with worry, but her eyes, a striking shade of slate grey, were sharp and intelligent. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. This was clearly Mrs. Sterling. My assistant told me. You refused her offer, she said, her voice a low, melodic contralto. It held a trace of exhaustion, but also a note of genuine curiosity. I did, Leo confirmed. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be difficult. I just don't feel right about it. She stepped closer, her gaze analytical, yet not unkind. The chauffeur said, You threw yourself in front of my daughter. You pushed her out of the way and took the fall yourself. You could have been killed. I just moved fast. He deflected, uncomfortable with the praise. How is she, Rosie? A hint of a smile, fragile, but real, touched the woman's lips. She's sleeping now. The doctors say the break was clean. She's strong. She keeps asking about the man who caught her. Leo felt a warmth spread through his chest, easing the ache in his ribs. She's a sweet kid. I have a son about her age. You see a child in trouble, you don't think. Most people freeze, she countered softly, or they pull out their phones to record. You acted. My daughter is safe because of you. I can never repay that, but I must do something. Knowing she's okay is enough. Really, Leo said, his resolve firm. He needed to go. This world of executive assistants and unspoken power made him feel exposed. His worn jeans and faded hoodie suddenly feeling like a costume of failure. I have to pick up my son. Mrs. Sterling held his gaze for a long moment, a silent assessment taking place. It was the kind of look he imagined she gave to business rivals across a boardroom table, incisive, discerning, and missing nothing. Finally she nodded. All right, Mr. Vance. For now. But this isn't over. Genevieve has your contact information. You will be hearing from me. It wasn't a threat, nor was it entirely a promise. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of a person who was accustomed to getting her way. As Leo walked out into the chilly evening air, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed, if precarious, world had just been breached by a force he couldn't possibly comprehend. He had wanted nothing in return, but he was beginning to realize that Seraphina Sterling was not a woman who took no for an answer. 3 days passed. The bruise on Leo's side bloomed into a spectacular, painful palette of purple and blue, a constant reminder of the incident. He'd thrown himself back into the grind, taking extra delivery shifts to make up for the ruined catering order and the time lost at the hospital. He'd almost convinced himself that Mrs. Sterling's parting words were just a polite formality, an empty promise made in a moment of emotional distress. Then on a Saturday morning, while he and Owen were engaged in an epic battle with Lego spaceships on their living room floor, his phone rang. The number was blocked. He almost ignored it, but a strange premonition made him answer. Leo Vance speaking. "Mr. Vance, it's Seraphina Sterling." The voice was as calm and clear as he remembered. Leo sat up straight, scattering Lego bricks. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling. Hello, is Rosie all right?" "She's home and she's bored," Seraphina said, and for the first time he heard a hint of weary amusement in her tone. "She has a rather formidable pink cast on her leg, and she is discovering that being confined to a sofa is not nearly as exciting as she imagined. In fact, she's been asking for you, and more specifically for your son." Leo was taken aback. "My son, Owen, yes. Apparently while Rosie was waiting for the paramedics, you told her about him. She has since constructed an elaborate narrative in which he is a superhero who taught you your life-saving moves. She was wondering if he might be available for a visit. A consultation, perhaps." Leo looked at Owen, who was now attempting to fit a starship wing onto a Lego dinosaur. The idea was absurd. His son in their cramped second-floor apartment, visiting the home of a woman who was clearly immensely wealthy. The social chasm between them felt miles wide. "I don't know." He began, his insecurities bubbling to the surface. "We wouldn't want to impose." Mr. Vance, Seraphina's voice, cut through his hesitation, gentle but firm. "My daughter is lonely and in pain. She has asked for one thing that might make her happy. Please." "I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. I can send a car." The sincerity in her voice disarmed him. It wasn't a command from a wealthy woman, but a plea from a mother. "A car isn't necessary," he found himself saying. "But, okay. If you're sure, Owen would probably like that." 2 hours later, Leo found himself standing in front of a modern, minimalist mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. It wasn't a house. It was a statement, a structure of glass and steel that seemed to have been carved from the very bedrock of the shoreline. He held Owen's small hand, his own palm sweating slightly. Seraphina opened the door herself. Dressed in comfortable jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, she looked less like a corporate titan and more like any other mum on a Saturday. She offered a warm, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Leo. Owen. Thank you so much for coming." Owen, usually shy around strangers, looked up at her, and then hid behind Leo's leg. Rosie was ensconced on a massive white sofa in a living room that was larger than their entire apartment. Her pink cast was propped up on a pile of silk pillows, and she grinned brightly when she saw them. "You came," she exclaimed. Within minutes, any awkwardness evaporated, at least for the children. Owen, after a moment of hesitation, was captivated by Rosie's extensive collection of video games. Soon the cavernous room was filled with the sounds of digital explosions and the excited chatter of two kids bonding over a shared mission to defeat a virtual dragon. Leo stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the grey waves of the lake, feeling utterly out of place. "Coffee?" Seraphina asked, appearing at his side with 2 mugs. "Thank you," he said, gratefully accepting one. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the children. I wanted to apologize for Genevieve, Seraphina said suddenly. At the hospital, she's efficient. It can sometimes come across as cold. She's been with me since my husband passed, and her primary function is to build walls. I'm afraid she saw you as a problem to be solved with a bank transfer. It's okay. I understand, Leo said. When you have a lot, I imagine, a lot of people want something from you. Her eyes met his, and he saw a flicker of that same guardedness, but also a sliver of vulnerability. Yes, they do, which is why your refusal was so jarring. In a good way, they talked for over an hour. It wasn't an interview or an interrogation. It was a conversation. She asked about Owen, and Leo found himself speaking about his son's creativity, his love for drawing, and the funny way he narrated his own life as if he were the star of a movie. In turn, she spoke about Rosie's adventurous spirit, a trait she'd inherited from her late father, a passionate mountaineer. She spoke of the difficulty of balancing a demanding career with being a present single parent, a sentiment that resonated deeply with Leo. For the first time since his studio had collapsed, Leo was talking to an adult, a peer not as a courier or a tenant, but simply as a person. He found himself relaxing, the deep lines of stress around his eyes softening. Later, while the kids were occupied with a new game, Owen tugged a familiar object from his backpack. It was Leo's old sketchbook. "My dad draws," he announced proudly to Rosie, opening it to a page filled with fantastical creatures and expressive character designs. Rosie's eyes went wide. "Wow, did you draw these?" she asked Leo. Before Leo could answer, Seraphina had moved closer, her gaze drawn to the open page. She looked at the drawings, her expression unreadable. She pointed to a detailed sketch in the corner, a determined-looking boy with a shock of unruly hair, gazing at a star-filled sky. "This is incredible work, Leo," she said, her voice quiet with a strange intensity. The line work, the emotion in the character's eyes. "You're a professional." "I was," Leo said, a familiar ache of loss twisting in his gut. He quickly closed the sketchbook. "A long time ago." It was another lifetime. The shift in his demeanor was palpable. The easygoing father was gone, replaced by a man haunted by a ghost. Seraphina noticed it immediately. She didn't press, but a thoughtful, speculative look entered her eyes. She had seen more than just a drawing. She had seen the shadow of a forgotten dream. As they prepared to leave a few hours later, Owen and Rosie exchanged solemn promises to see each other again soon. "Thank you for this," Leo Seraphina said at the door. "You have no idea how much it meant to her." To me. Driving home in his beat-up car, the scent of a lakeside mansion still clinging to his clothes, Leo felt a confusing mix of emotions. The gulf between their lives was immense, almost comical. Yet for a few hours in a conversation between two single parents, that gulf had seemed to disappear. He had let his guard down, and in doing so, had inadvertently shown her a part of himself he had kept locked away for years. He just hoped he wouldn't regret it. The first visit became a second, then a third. The burgeoning friendship between Owen and Rosie became the perfect excuse. Leo would tell himself he was only going for his son's sake, but he knew it was more than that. The Saturday afternoons at Seraphina's home became an oasis in his grueling week. They were a time when he wasn't just Leo the courier, but Leo the father, Leo the man. He and Seraphina would talk while the children played their conversations, meandering from the trials of parenting to favorite movies to the absurdities of life in a bustling city. He learned she was a voracious reader of classic science fiction. He discovered she had a dry, wicked sense of humor that only surfaced when she was relaxed. He saw the way her entire being softened whenever she looked at Rosie. He was starting to see the woman behind the carefully constructed wealthy facade. And he liked her. Still, he remained willfully ignorant of the specifics of her life. He knew she ran her late husband's company, but he never asked what it was. In his mind, she was simply Rosie's mum, a detail that kept her grounded and approachable, preventing the intimidating reality of her wealth from overwhelming their tentative friendship. He was comfortable in this bubble of deliberate ignorance. That bubble was destined to burst. About a month after the accident, Seraphina invited them for an early dinner. "Rosie's getting her cast off next week," she'd said over the phone. "She wants to celebrate with her two favorite people." When they arrived, a man in a dark suit was leaving the house carrying a briefcase. He nodded curtly at Seraphina. "The final proposal is on your desk, Mrs. Sterling. The board meeting is Monday." "Thank you, Robert," she said, her tone all business. The shift was jarring. For a brief moment, Leo saw the CEO. Inside, the kids immediately ran off to the media room. Seraphina led Leo towards the kitchen. "Can I get you something to drink? I have to send one last email. Then I am officially off the clock." "Sure. Water is fine," he said, lingering in the entryway. His eyes scanned the hall, a space he'd passed through a dozen times, but never truly examined. It was lined with impressive abstract art, but one piece caught his eye. It was a framed magazine cover, proudly displayed. Forbes. The headline read, "The Iron Widow, How Seraphina Sterling Doubled Aethelred Media's Value and Silenced a Generation of Doubters." The woman on the cover was undeniably Seraphina. She looked different. Her hair was down. Her expression was one of formidable power. Her grey eyes seeming to cut right through the camera lens. She looked like a queen surveying her empire, Aethelred Media Group. The name hit Leo like a physical blow. It wasn't just a company. It was one of the largest media conglomerates in the world. They owned movie studios, television networks, streaming services, and publishing houses. They were a titan, a name synonymous with global entertainment. And Seraphina Sterling wasn't just running it, she was dominating with it. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. He felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. All their conversations, all his candid complaints about his gig economy, struggles, his cynical jokes about the 1%. He'd been saying these things to a woman who practically defined the term. He suddenly felt like a fool, a court jester, who had been unknowingly performing for the Queen. His entire perception of their interactions shifted. Was her kindness just pity? Was her interest in his drawings just the passing curiosity of a billionaire indulging a poor man's hobby? The chasm he'd felt on that first day was no longer just miles wide. It was a cosmic void. He was a speck of dust and she was a galaxy. Seraphina returned a warm smile on her face that vanished when she saw his expression. She followed his gaze to the magazine cover on the wall. "Ah," she said softly. "You see it?" Leo couldn't speak for a moment. He just nodded, his throat tight. "Aethelred Media." He finally managed to say the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. "That's you." "Yes," she said, her eyes searching his face. "I should have told you. I'm sorry. It's just, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was meeting someone as just Rosie's mom." It was a luxury I wasn't eager to give up. Her explanation was genuine, but it did little to quell the storm of inadequacy raging inside him. His pride, that stubborn, foolish thing, was screaming. He, the failure who couldn't even keep a two-man animation studio afloat, had been baring his soul to the head of a global media empire. The power imbalance was staggering. I need to use the restroom," he mumbled, needing to escape her discerning gaze. He found his way to a small powder room off the main hall. He leaned against the cool marble sink, splashing cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the tired eyes, the cheap, faded shirt, the faint scar on his temple from a childhood fall. This was the face of a man who worried about making rent, not about quarterly earnings reports. He thought of his sketchbook, of the dreams he'd shared so carelessly. To her, his life's ambition was probably a rounding error in her company's budget. The thought was humiliating. When he returned, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Seraphina was standing by the window, her back to him, watching the children play on the lawn. "Leo," she said without turning around, "please don't let this change things." "How can it not?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We're from different planets, Seraphina." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "We are from different circumstances. Our planets are exactly the same. We're both single parents, trying our best to raise good kids. We've both lost someone we loved. We both know what it's like to feel alone in a crowd. Does the rest of it, the noise, the money, does that really matter more than the truth we find in a simple conversation?" Her words were a lifeline, an attempt to bridge the void that had just opened between them. He wanted to believe her. He truly did. But the image of that magazine cover was burned into his mind. She wasn't just a friend. She was a benefactor, a potential savior, a role he had never asked for, and wasn't sure he could accept. Dinner was a quiet affair. The children, oblivious, chattered away their easy laughter, a stark contrast to the strained silence of the adults. Leo felt a wall going up around him, the same wall he'd built after his studio failed, designed to protect him from hope and disappointment. He was polite but distant. The easy camaraderie they had built was gone, replaced by a new, uncomfortable awareness. As he drove Owen home that night, the city lights blurred through his windshield. He had stumbled into the orbit of a star, and now, fully aware of its blinding brilliance, he was terrified of being burned. The revelation hadn't brought them closer. It had pushed him further away, leaving him more isolated than ever before. The week following the revelation was agonizingly quiet. Leo threw himself into his work with a grim determination, taking every delivery he could get, the physical exhaustion, a welcome distraction from the turmoil in his head. He ignored the polite text from Seraphina, asking if they were okay for their usual Saturday visit. He replied with a lame excuse about having to work a double shift. It felt like a lie and a betrayal, but the thought of facing her, armed with the full knowledge of who she was, filled him with a paralyzing sense of inadequacy. He was a failure. She was a monumental success. It was that simple. Any friendship between them felt like a farce. On Friday evening, as he was sketching with Owen at their small kitchen table, there was a knock on the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it to find Seraphina Sterling, standing in the dimly lit hallway of his apartment building. She was dressed in a simple but elegant trench coat, her presence so at odds with the peeling paint and worn-out carpet that it felt surreal. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Can I come in?" Stunned into silence, Leo simply stepped aside. She entered the small, cluttered apartment, her eyes taking everything in the stacks of Owen's books, the worn sofa, the lingering smell of the spaghetti they'd had for dinner. She didn't look disgusted or pitiful. She looked observant. Owen's face lit up. "Seraphina, is Rosie here?" "Not tonight, sweetie," she said, her smile warm as she looked at him. "I just needed to talk to your dad for a minute. That's a wonderful drawing of a dragon." She turned her attention back to Leo, who was standing awkwardly by the door, his heart pounding. "You've been avoiding me," she stated simply. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "I've been busy," he mumbled, knowing how weak it sounded. "No," she said, stepping closer. Her grey eyes were serious, cutting through his pretense. "You've been hiding. Leo, what you think is a barrier between us. The money, the company I see as a tool, a resource, and I want to use it." He stiffened. "I told you I don't want your money. I don't want a handout." "This is not a handout," she said, her voice gaining intensity. "This is a business proposal. I saw your sketchbook. I saw the passion in those drawings. I also did some research. I know about Vance visions. I read about the Star Eater's son. I even tracked down the original pitch Bible. It was brilliant, Leo, ambitious and heartfelt. It shouldn't have failed. Hearing her speak the name of his failed studio felt like a punch to the gut." "It did fail," he said, bitterly. "I failed. Your timing was bad, and your partner was a crook." She countered her knowledge of his past, shocking him. "The dream wasn't the failure. I want to fund it. I want to bring Vance Visions back to life as an independent animation division within Aethelred Media. You would have complete creative control, your own team, a real budget. Not my charity, Leo. My investment. I don't make sentimental investments. I invest in talent I believe will yield a return both culturally and financially. And I believe in your talent." He stared at her, speechless. It was everything he had ever wanted, handed to him on a silver platter. And that was the problem. It felt too easy, too unearned. It felt like a gift for saving her daughter, a debt being paid. "Why," he finally whispered, "because for years my company has been acquiring and optimizing. We've become ruthlessly efficient at generating content that is profitable. But my husband, he started the company because he loved telling stories, real stories. Your Star Eater's son is the kind of story he would have loved. I'm tired of just looking at balance sheets, Leo. I want to build something with heart again. This is as much for me as it is for you." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. Hope, a terrifying and fragile emotion, began to flicker within him. I have to think about it," he said, his mind reeling. "Of course," she said. "But to prove this is real, I want you to come with me to a preliminary budget meeting on Monday. You won't have to say a word. Just listen. See how we operate." Monday morning found Leo in a suit he hadn't worn in 5 years, feeling like an imposter as he sat in an obscenely luxurious boardroom on the 50th floor of the Aethelred Tower. Seraphina sat at the head of the table, the picture of calm authority. Around her were a dozen executives in expensive suits, their faces grim. One man in particular, a silver-haired executive with cold reptilian eyes named Alistair Davenport, seemed to be leading the opposition. "Seraphina, with all due respect," Davenport began, his voice a condescending purr. "The board is already concerned about the third-quarter downturn in the international box office. Sinking $50 million into a new, unproven animation venture based on a personal recommendation is fiscally irresponsible. Animation is a brutal market dominated by established players. This Vance Visions has a history of failure." Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. Seraphina's gaze was like ice. Vance Visions was a two-man operation that fell victim to embezzlement, Alistair. The creative vision which you've all seen in the pitch I distributed is singular. We are stagnating. We are recycling franchises. We need new original voices. This is not a pet project. It is a strategic investment in originality. It's a vanity project, Davenport countered, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly at Leo, his eyes dripping with disdain. "A very expensive thank you note to the man who helped your daughter. The optics are sentimental and weak, The shareholders will see it for what it is, an emotional decision, not a business one. The air crackled with tension. The other executives shifted uncomfortably. Davenport had voiced the ugly thought that had been festering in Leo's own mind. He was the charity case. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to shrink, to disappear. He saw the challenge in Davenport's eyes, the clear message that he was an outsider who would be chewed up and spat out by this corporate machine. But then he looked at Seraphina. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't angry. She was composed, her gaze unwavering. "The decision is not up for debate, Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I am informing the board of my executive decision, not asking for permission. This division is happening. Your job is to support it, not to undermine it. Is that clear?" Davenport's smirk faltered. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. "Perfectly." The meeting concluded soon after, but the battle lines had been drawn. As Leo walked out of the boardroom, his head swimming, he understood Seraphina's offer was real. But he also understood that accepting it meant walking into a war zone. Alistair Davenport was a predator who smelled blood in the water, and Leo was the wounded animal he had just marked as his prey. The dream was within his grasp, but it was surrounded by sharks. Accepting Seraphina's offer was like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly only to realize the sky was full of turbulence. The first few months were a whirlwind of dizzying highs and crushing lows. Seraphina was true to her word, providing Leo with a state-of-the-art studio space in a newly renovated wing of the Aethelred building and a budget that made his head spin. He was officially the creative head of Vance Visions, a division of Aethelred Media. He hired a small, hungry team of brilliant artists, many of whom were young talents overlooked by the larger studios. Their energy was infectious. For the first time in years, Leo felt alive, his days filled with storyboards, character models, and the exhilarating process of creation. He and his team resurrected the Star Eater's son, breathing new life into the story that had been his masterpiece and his undoing. Owen would visit the studio after school, his eyes wide with wonder, watching his father's drawings come to life on massive screens. It was everything Leo had ever dreamed of, but Alistair Davenport was a shadow that loomed over it all. He never confronted Leo directly. His attacks were more insidious, a death by 1,000 cuts. He used the labyrinthine bureaucracy of Aethelred Media as his weapon. Equipment requisitions were inexplicably delayed for weeks. Payroll authorizations were lost in the system. Key software licenses were held up in legal review. Every step forward required a mountain of paperwork and a dozen phone calls, usually ending at the desk of someone who reported directly to Davenport. Leo found himself spending more time battling spreadsheets and arguing with procurement officers than he did animating. The stress was immense. He was a creator, not a corporate politician, and he was hopelessly out of his depth. The joy of the work was being slowly suffocated by the red tape. Davenport's true venom, however, was reserved for the corporate sphere. He subtly poisoned the well against Vance Visions, referring to it in executive meetings as Seraphina's folly. He would casually mention budget overages he himself had caused through his delays and framed them as Leo's financial mismanagement. He fostered a narrative that Leo was an amateur, a charity case, who was taking advantage of Seraphina's misplaced gratitude. The whispers reached Leo through sympathetic members of his own team. The weight of it all was crushing. He felt the trust of his artists wavering. He saw the pitying looks from other division heads in the elevator. He started second-guessing every creative decision, every line item in his budget, terrified of proving Davenport right. The dream was rapidly becoming a nightmare. The breaking point came during a quarterly progress review. Leo and his team had prepared a stunning 5-minute animated sequence, the culmination of months of grueling work. It was the heart of the film, a tender moment between the boy and the fallen star. He presented it to Seraphina Davenport and a handful of other senior executives. When the lights came up, the room was silent. Leo's heart was in his throat. He knew the work was good. It was magical. Seraphina's face was glowing with pride. Leo, that was breathtaking, but Davenport spoke before anyone else could. It's very quaint, he said the word, dripping with condescension. But the market analysis for animated features, which my department ran last week, shows a definitive trend towards high-octane comedic ensembles. Sentimental fantasy pieces have underperformed by an average of 40% in the last 2 fiscal years. The sequence is technically proficient, but the core concept is commercially non-viable. We're backing the wrong horse. He slid a thick report across the table towards Seraphina. I've taken the liberty of outlining a pivot. My team has developed a concept about a group of wise-cracking city squirrels who learn to rap. It tests through the roof with the 6 to 10 demographic. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. It was a public execution. Davenport hadn't just criticized his work, he had tried to assassinate it, replacing it with a soulless, market-tested product. That night, Leo sat alone in the studio, the glowing screens mocking him with half-finished scenes. The weight of his past failure and his present struggle crashed down on him. Davenport was right. He was an amateur. He was a sentimental fool who had no place in this cutthroat world. He had mistaken an act of pity for a genuine opportunity, and now he was going to drag Seraphina and the talented team he'd hired down with him. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write his resignation letter. The studio door opened softly. It was Seraphina. She must have known he'd still be there. She looked at the defeated slump of his shoulders, the letter on his desk. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a fierce intensity. "I can't do this, Seraphina," he said, his voice cracking. "He's right. I don't belong here. I'm going to ruin you." She walked over and stood in front of his desk, her presence filling the room. "Alistair Davenport is a shark, and sharks only respect 2 things: bigger sharks and blood in the water. He thinks you're bleeding. Do you know what my late husband used to say? The boardroom is the only place in the world where you can bleed to death from a paper cut. Davenport is giving you paper cuts, and you are letting yourself bleed out." She picked up a stylus and turned to one of the large digital displays, calling up a single beautiful frame from the sequence he had shown. It was the boy, his face illuminated with wonder as he touched the gentle light of the star. "Look at that," she commanded. "That is not commercially non-viable. That is magic. That is heart. That is the reason I did this. Aethelred Media has dozens of Alistair Davenports. It has hundreds of people who can produce a movie about rapping squirrels. It only has one, Leo Vance." Tears pricked at Leo's eyes. "But he won't stop. Then we fight back," she said, her eyes blazing with a fire he'd never seen before. "Not with his weapons, not with spreadsheets and bureaucracy. We fight back with the work. We finish this film. We make it so undeniably brilliant that even a soulless numbers man like Davenport can't argue with it. But I can't do it for you, Leo. You have to stop seeing yourself as the man I saved and start being the man I invested in." "Are you that man?" Her question hung in the air, a challenge and a declaration of faith all in one. He looked from her determined face to the beautiful image on the screen, the ghost of his dream made real. The exhaustion and fear were still there, but beneath them a different feeling was stirring: anger. A righteous, defiant anger. He had let Davenport intimidate him. let him shrink his own dream. No more. He stood up, his back straighter than it had been in months. He looked Seraphina in the eye, the gratitude, the friendship, the shared struggle, all culminating in this single pivotal moment. "Yes," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I am." She nodded, a slow, proud smile spreading across her face. "Good. Now show me what you're working on next. We have a movie to finish." The war wasn't over, but Leo Vance had finally chosen to fight. The fight was brutal, but it was no longer a solitary one. Armed with Seraphina's unwavering support, Leo's entire mindset shifted. He stopped trying to play Davenport's corporate game and focused solely on the film. When Davenport's office created a roadblock, a single sharp email from Seraphina would miraculously clear the path. She ran interference, absorbing the political attacks and bureaucratic nonsense, leaving Leo and his team free to do what they did best: create. Freed from the constant stress, the studio flourished, the team, sensing the change in their leader and fiercely loyal to his vision, worked with a renewed passion. The final months of production were a blur of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled brainstorming sessions, and the pure, unadulterated joy of watching a shared dream coalesce into something real and beautiful. The Star Eater's son was no longer just Leo's story. It belonged to all of them. Throughout it all, the bond between Leo and Seraphina deepened. Their relationship transcended that of investor and artist. They were partners, confidants in a shared battle. They celebrated small victories with coffee in the studio late at night and navigated setbacks with quiet, reassuring conversations. The pretense of their different worlds had vanished, replaced by the solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. Their children, Owen and Rosie, now inseparable best friends, were a constant happy reminder of the strange, serendipitous event that had brought them all together. The premiere was held at the historic Chicago Theater, a glittering red carpet affair. Leo stood near the entrance in a well-fitted tuxedo, a gift from Seraphina, feeling a sense of profound disbelief. He watched as the industry's elite people he had once only read about in trade magazines walked past him. He saw his team beaming with pride, celebrating with their families. He saw Owen looking impossibly grown up in a small suit, explaining the plot of the movie to an equally excited Rosie. Alistair Davenport was there, of course, his face a mask of polite indifference. But Leo saw the flicker of defeat in his eyes when an early review from a major critic flashed on a nearby screen, calling the film a triumphant return to heartfelt classic animation, a visual masterpiece with a soul. Seraphina found him standing in the shadows at the back of the theater, just as the lights began to dim. She looked stunning in a simple, elegant black gown. Nervous, she asked, her voice a warm whisper beside him. Terrified, he admitted, his hands clenched in his pockets. What if they hate it? She put a reassuring hand on his arm. They won't. You poured your heart onto that screen, Leo. People will feel it. They watched the film together, not from the VIP seats, but standing in the back like two conspirators. He didn't watch the screen. He watched the audience. He saw them laugh at the jokes he'd written years ago in a dusty apartment. He saw them gasp at the breathtaking visual sequences his team had poured their souls into. And in the final heart-wrenching scene, he heard a wave of soft sniffles ripple through the theater. When the credits rolled, there was a moment of stunned silence. And then the theater erupted. The applause was thunderous, a tidal wave of validation and appreciation. On screen, the final credit appeared in simple white letters, a Vance Visions production. Leo felt the tours he'd been holding back for 5 long years finally fall. Seraphina squeezed his arm, her own eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered. Later at the celebratory after-party, Leo was surrounded. Producers wanted to talk about his next project. Actors wanted to voice his characters. His own team hoisted him into the air, chanting his name. It was overwhelming, surreal, and wonderful. He finally broke away from the crowd, seeking a moment of peace. He found it on a quiet balcony overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. A few moments later, Seraphina joined him. "Quite a night," she said, smiling. "I still can't believe it's real," he confessed. "A few months ago, I was delivering lukewarm tacos, trying to figure out how to avoid my landlord." "You were never just a delivery driver." "Leo," she said, turning to face him. "You were an artist, waiting for the world to catch up. I'm just glad I was there to give it a little push." He looked at her, at this incredible woman who had seen past his circumstances and recognized the dream he had almost let die. The gratitude he felt was so immense, it was almost painful. It was more than gratitude. It was something deeper, something that had been quietly growing in the spaces between their late-night conversations and shared worries. "You didn't just revive my dream, Seraphina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You revived me." She held his gaze, the noise of the party fading into the background. In her eyes, he didn't see a billionaire CEO or a corporate titan. He saw the worried mother from the hospital, the patient friend who had listened to his fears, the fierce partner who had fought for him. "You saved my daughter's life, Leo Vance," she said softly. "It seems we're even." He smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. For the first time, he felt he was truly her equal. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. The future was no longer a terrifying, uncertain fog. It was as bright and full of promise as the sprawling metropolis laid out before them. His dream was reborn, and somewhere along the way, he had found something he never expected: a new beginning. That single moment, a father's instinct, a child's red ball set in motion, a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Leo's story is a powerful reminder that our lives can pivot in an instant, and that kindness is never a wasted act. It shows us that beneath the labels of struggling dad or billionaire CEO are just people searching for connection, purpose, and a second chance. His journey wasn't just about reviving a failed animation studio. It was about reclaiming his own worth and finding the courage to dream again, all because he chose to help a little girl on a cold Tuesday afternoon. If this story of hope, resilience, and unexpected connection moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their dreams are still worth fighting for. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire and warm the heart. Thank you for listening.